air tag on my dog 2 days in a row. Made the run for it. I guess the air tag only syncs up every several minutes. So I have to wait. Like, oh, he moved over there. I'm driving all over the golf cart. He's such a jerk.
You don't have a buzzer like that, but then it's like-
Yeah,
Comes
electric
in for a
shocker.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get that
Have to
too.
Stop them in place. for-
Right, just completely
Too
stunning.
quick.
Oh, I think I may have told you the
Paul, can you
story.
hear us
I
now?
did get a
Tim, thank you.
electrode one, and when we were on Edgewood, and it took off.
Yeah.
And I used it.
Thanks, Sam.
I
Is
don't
it Monji?
Monday, yeah, bailed out into Sue's yard under the bush in the back. So I couldn't see him. I'm like, found out that I had it like on my ass. Then I think he was in the bush like. He couldn't come home because he was so stunned. Beard's like, you gave him brain damage for sure.
We had a dog that was Sean and it was probably he would bark the whole time he was outside, even if you were with him. Yeah, so we got kind of turned on people on the high side so that he would get a message. He barked, got the zap and yelped even louder, and he's like hopping around the whole backyard. Oh,
Drama.
well, it's true.
That's only spoken from a mother. I give the fatherly explanation. My dogs are butt heads. I have. I mean, I'm just being honest. 2 days and 2 escapes in a few days. Oh, jerk. No, I opened the garage and my daughter brought home a hamster for a week. And so they go outside and they just stare at this hamster. Well, I didn't know they were in the garage. So I open it and takes off running. That's what we were talking about, air tag. I have an air tag on him now. The Apple air tag, put it on your keys and whatnot. You just stick it in their collar. Yeah. Yeah, because it only syncs up every like 5 to 9 minutes or something. So they have a running start on you unless they decide they get occupied by a squirrel or something.
I'd like to call the general plan working group to order for Thursday, October 6th, 2023. We have roll call, please.
Chairman Walt Stanish.
Here.
Vice Chair Lisa Hetchman. Here. Edwin Okamura.
Here.
Tom Donnelly.
Here.
Emmett Holtslander. Judith Adamson. Art Darden.
Here.
Rick Dolk.
Here.
Lisa Duke. Here.
Can you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of the United States of America,
to
the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'll open it up to public comment. Anyone that'd like to speak on anything that's not on the agenda tonight can come up and speak.
Hello, Aiden Mayhood. I'm not sure if any of you were absent from the last city council meeting, but I just wanted to reiterate some of my points that I made at the last city council meeting. My name is Aiden Mayhood. I'm a 7th generation member of the Rio Vista community and come from a long line of Solano County pioneer farmers. Our farmers act as important stewards of our natural resources and cultivators of our food supply. They are both preservationists and business people who cherish their ancestral history. Let's remember that Flannery believes that our local farmers call themselves farmers in an attempt to gather sympathy from our community. Flannery thus far has demonstrated disregard for historical community dynamics and traditions. They have forged a scorched earth path with our farmers and vital members of our community in an interest to circumvent the county's orderly growth initiative and reshape the county's general plan. The city council and all of its committees, in the best interest of its constituents, must oppose any attempts to incorporate new cities in unincorporated areas of Solano County. Development within Solano County must be done within current city limits or directly adjacent to them through well-planned and community-backed city annexations. We have entrusted you, the council and committees, to forge Rio Vista's future with us, your constituents, not Silicon Valley billionaires with separate monetary interests. Even if you can't take any action to prevent development of our unincorporated areas, we need to hear your voices in opposition to such plans. The city must refuse to engage in quid pro quo with Flannery Associates. Flannery has proven thus far that many of their interests do not align with Rio Vista. They have put a stranglehold on the city's ability to grow in the future and will extort our city through false promises and by dangling the city carrots. Flannery has proven to be untrustworthy and unethical. We must remember that the ends don't justify the means. Thank you.
There's nobody else here. Anybody online?
There are no public comments online.
Okay, I'll close public comment and we'll move on to item number 3, action items, approval of the September 7th, 2023 minutes. Do I have anyone that has any comments on it first?
I do.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Just in the section 4.1 under the long term, it's in the second full paragraph. It just speaks to, in about the 4th or 5th line from the bottom of that paragraph, it says 6,000 hours reduction, I think, per day. And since there's not 6,000 hours in a day, I think just needs to be defined somewhat, either that the CMP, which was initials right in that same paragraph, just spell that out, or maybe it was an aggregate for the number of travelers through here. It just wasn't clear exactly what you could conclude from that paragraph. And so just a little bit of a phrase would be great.
Okay, anything else from anybody? Okay, then do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
We have a second.
Second. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Chairman Walt Stanish.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lisa Hedgeman,
Yes.
Edwin Okamura,
Yes.
Tom Donnelly,
Yes.
Emmett Holtzlander,
Yes.
Judith Adamson, Art Darden.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna move on to discussion items. 4.1, review of planning area boundaries. And I think, is that Paul or is it Nick?
That would be me, sir.
Okay.
Paul Yunker, contract planner to the city of Rio Vista. Apologies for not being able to join you in person. Family obligations are requiring my presence elsewhere, but we're looking forward to a productive meeting. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my presentation for the evening. Okay, share screen. Okay, you should be seeing the presentation at this point.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. A quick look at the agenda. We're going to be discussing planning area boundaries first. Some discussions have occurred at the city council level, and we want to make a proposal to the working group. Then we'll have Jacqueline Protzman-Rohr, who's assisted us with the safety element, present to you the draft goals, policies, and programs, as well as an introduction to the safety element. And then a relatively late breaking item. Within the last few days, we did receive a request from a property owner to have a designation on the general plan land use diagram change. So we'll go through that. Relatively light agenda compared to some of the meetings we've had of recent. So I'd like to go ahead and just get started on the planning area boundaries. As Aidan spoke of this just at the beginning of the meeting, the Flannery Associates group has come forward. They're now referred to as California Forever. I think everybody in the room is well aware of this. We do not know exactly where Flannery will be developing because they haven't disclosed that, but it's very likely going to be west of Rio Vista. As this group knows, throughout this process, we had no knowledge of Flannery's plans, and therefore based on the negotiations as we understood them, did not anticipate any development on Flannery Associates land that would affect the city. And with the daylighting of California Forever, we know that that's far from the case. Flannery, in fact, is describing very significant development, and that's requiring that we take a look at our planning area boundary and consider whether we want to make any adjustments. We did discuss with the city council the changes that are really coming and how they'll affect the city in the context of a discussion of the sphere of influence, not the planning area specifically. But in that discussion, the city council did express its concerns of how California Forever could impact the city and expressed a desire that we have as much local influence over land uses between the city and Flannery as possible. And one of the ways that that starts, at really the beginning of the planning process, is the establishment of a planning area. So there's a few changes that we're proposing. I'll go over these on the map. But we are talking about an expanded planning area. We're talking about changing the designation within the planning area. And then because of the nature of this, we believe there's also going to be required a discussion in the general plan itself. This will be essentially a new chapter that will address land within the planning area. But we're not proposing at this time to offer any urban land use designation. There wouldn't be any entitlement or any right to develop under this designation. It would rather be a statement of city expectations. Why is the planning area established as it is, and what do we expect to see in that area? So let's go ahead and take a look at the existing general plan on the left. We did designate a planning area generally surrounding the Brand Ranch property and Liberty property, because we anticipate, and this would be actually a very logical extension of development for Rio Vista, but for the fact that Flannery has purchased much of that land. We had designated as neighborhood residential as well, consistent with the designations that are in Brand Ranch and the Liberty project. What we are proposing, asking the general plan working group to consider, is an expanded planning area boundary. Now, all of the planning area is shown in pink, and a few things are happening here. One, the boundary is expanding to include land southwest of Highway 12. So we see an expanded geography within the planning area. The planning area also is designated study area. This is a designation the city has in the past used on the northern extent of the city on the river. The study area designation, as I mentioned a minute ago, would not confer any development rights. Rather, it would just be a statement of how the city anticipates growing and the importance of this land in the city's future. That study area designation is now applied to land that's currently in the city's sphere of influence, but has no designation under the general plan. So this land is in the SOI, but in the past general plan and so far in this general plan, we've not designated it as anything. And then there was a small industrial area that had been identified study area in the previous general plan. We were carrying that forward. What we're saying now is everything on the southwest side of the highway would be within the planning area and designated study area, as well as the area around Brand Ranch and Liberty. I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer, but we can now see how this lays out. All of these lands, but for Flannery, would be reasonable to consider for expansion of the city. They're very logical. They would take advantage of the Highway 12 transportation corridor. They're directly adjacent to the city. They're away from the legal delta, which is everything on the northeast side of Airport Road. So this is actually a very logical and responsible direction to be thinking about growth. Although this designation does not confer growth, it does not confer development, it just will be a statement that the city is very interested in this area and that we want to have as much influence over this area as possible. We may well seek to expand the sphere of influence to encompass this area. That would be a discussion that we have to have with LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission. Chair, that's my presentation on this item. I'd like to answer any questions.
Yep, Paul, I have a question. This lavender area that you outlined, is that all Flannery property?
Not all, but there are significant Flannery holdings within it.
So what doesn't belong to Flannery? I guess that's the question now.
One moment, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I think I'm going to. There it is. Let me go ahead and pull up a separate diagram that we have that shows the Flannery properties. Okay. You should be looking at a white and orange map now. Is that showing on screens?
Yes.
Okay, so the industrial property, 1/4 section on the south side of 12, 1/4 section in this area, a tail of a parcel up here. The rest in the orange is all currently Flannery holdings. I do have to offer a caveat that these are properties that were purchased by Flannery, but they've been in the process of trading lands. And so this map may not be completely up to date because Flannery now, instead of purchasing new lands, has started to move into a mode of trading lands between property owners. So this, to the best of my knowledge, is the current Flannery holdings.
Okay.
Other questions?
First question, could you explain what you mean by their trading?
I apologize, I can't hear the speaker.
Sorry, what do you mean by their trading lands?
My understanding is that Flannery has been actively approaching property owners and to transfer ownership of land they've acquired to property owners.
You're frozen, I think. Paul.
Nick's not frozen, Paul is.
Assessors and tax rolls and recorded documents.
Hey,
We
Paul,
missed half of that.
You were frozen there for a minute. Can you repeat that, please? Word by word?
I apologize. Am I coming through okay now?
Yes.
The Flannery group has been approaching property owners and swapping lands. And because of that, there may be some changes in the vicinity of Rio Vista that we haven't yet captured on this map. We have been attempting to keep this as accurate as possible, but that's a matter of getting the most recent recordation of ownership from the assessor. And so there's a little bit of a lag in that information.
Okay. Anybody else with any questions? Public comment?
I had a question.
Oh,
So
ahead.
the area that looks like Esperson in that diagram, so that, why isn't that a study area? Because we just decided that, I mean, they own it, Flannery owns that, right?
On that property, in earlier discussions, we decided there's an approved project. There's a general plan designation, and we didn't particularly care that it had changed ownership. And so for that reason, we did retain the designations from the previous general plan that are consistent with the Del Rio Hills approved project. It's still an approved project, even though ownership has changed.
Okay, thanks.
Public comment?
I don't know if we can get the map back up there, but I pay pretty close attention to the county assessor records. And from my understanding is that Part of the Amy Ranch southwest of the city is now back in Amy ownership, as well as almost all of the Hamilton Ranch. So the land to the southwest of the Esperson land would be now back into the farmer's ownership, whereas the rest of the land is still owned by Flannery.
Aiden, do I understand that we're talking about these two parcels?
From my understanding, it might just be the lower parcel on that one, and also to the one that's kind of triangle shaped to the left is back in private ownership. I can't confirm the back half of the Hamilton property, however.
And those are the transfers I referred to and had heard that there was some near the city. Thank you for that information. We will follow up with the assessor.
Okay.
Is there anybody online?
There are no public comments
Okay,
online.
I'll close public comment. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments before we move on to the next part? Okay, Paul. 4.2.
Great. Thank you. And we will proceed with these changes and incorporate them into the working draft land use maps, having heard no concerns from the commission. Let me jump back to the presentation. The Solano County Collaborative has assisted the cities and county with housing element and safety element updates. The firm Placeworks was retained, and they are the group that prepared our housing element. What we haven't talked nearly as much about is that Jacqueline and her team have been working on the safety element under that same funding agreement. And we're very pleased to have Jacqueline come forward this evening and share with you some background on the safety element, as well as present the goals, policies, and programs of the safety element. We'll be back next meeting with the full text of that safety element. And so with that, I'm going to bring up the presentation. And Jacqueline, you're up. Just let me know when you'd like to progress.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul. So I will present a quick overview of the safety element and we'll just get into it. So the safety element is one of the mandatory elements of a general plan focusing on natural and human caused hazards within and surrounding Rio Vista, as well as emergency response and preparedness. So the goal of this element is to protect the city, including residents, businesses, infrastructure, and the environment from natural disasters and other hazards. So these hazards in Rio Vista include sea level rise along the shoreline of the Sacramento River, flooding from inland sources, hazardous materials, emergency evacuation, seismic hazards, and hazards that may worsen due to climate change, such as extreme heat and drought. Next slide. So why update the safety element? The first reason is to update the background information with any new science or mapping, and also update the policies to address any new or ongoing hazards of concern in the community. So the safety element is just one part of Rio Vista's overall approach to protecting the community against natural hazards, and it does integrate with several other city documents to do so. So on the right, you'll see a figure of that. So the safety element is a high-level, broad document that addresses the comprehensive public safety approach in the city. There's also the recently adopted local hazard mitigation plan, which is a more detailed short-term plan focusing on specific actions. There's also the city's emergency operations plan, which is the internal plan for emergency response and recovery. So the safety element integrates information from these plans and ties into them as appropriate to create a cohesive safety approach. Other benefits of an updated safety element include syncing with the housing element, being consistent with other planning documents and elements of the general plan, and also improving eligibility for grant funding to implement some of the hazard mitigation projects. Next slide. So since the previous update to the safety element, several new laws have come into effect. These updates include revisions to the government code to increase requirements in the flood and fire sections to identify responsible agencies and ensure coordination among these agencies, as well as minimize the risk for new development and essential facilities. There's also a focus on climate adaptation and resilience, requiring safety elements to prepare a vulnerability assessment that identifies risks to hazards, and then develop a set of goals, policies, and implementation actions to build resilience in the community. AB 2140 allows for the incorporation of the local hazard mitigation plan and makes the city potentially eligible for increased disaster relief funds. There are also two new laws, SB 99 and AB 747, which focus on evacuation, requiring the identification of evacuation route capacity and safety, as well as evacuation constrained areas. Next slide. So the main analysis that was done in the preparation of the safety element is the climate change vulnerability assessment. This assessment evaluated how people and key community assets such as buildings, infrastructure, and economic systems may be affected by climate change hazards, and also the degree to which they're vulnerable. So the vulnerability assessment also assessed the availability of existing tools, programs, and resources to help people prepare for, respond to, and recover from these impacts. So in Rio Vista, local climate impacts include sea level rise and increased flooding along the Sacramento River, more intense rainfall and severe weather events, increase in frequency and intensity of drought conditions, and more frequent extreme heat events. Next slide. So through the vulnerability assessment process, we identified the following key vulnerabilities. So inland flooding creates the most vulnerabilities in Rio Vista. The most vulnerable populations include households in poverty, immigrant communities, outdoor workers, and low resource people of color. For infrastructure and buildings, State Route 12, the Rio Vista Airport, the marina, and homes and residential structures are the most vulnerable. The agricultural industry and outdoor recreation are the most vulnerable economic drivers, especially to sea level rise and extreme heat. And then public transit is the most vulnerable key service, especially to inland flooding. So with that, if there are no questions, I can move on to presenting the goals, policies, and programs.
Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, Jackie, go ahead.
Okay, next slide. So as previously stated, the safety element establishes policies and programs to address both natural and human caused hazards. We prepared the goals, policies, and programs to directly address these and integrate climate adaptation where possible. And after receiving your feedback tonight, we'll refine these policies and programs and bring back the full element, it sounds like, at the next meeting. Next slide. So starting off with goals, we have 3 goals proposed for the element. The first is focused on just minimizing loss of life and damage to property from natural and human caused hazards. The second is to maintain emergency response services to basically continue to meet the community's needs. And the third is focused on community resilience to climate change. Any comments or questions on the 3 goals?
Nope.
Okay. So now we'll get into policies. The first is basically officially incorporating the Rio Vista Annex of the Local Hazard Mitigation Plan into the safety element. And the second is to ensure emergency preparedness and response. Education materials are available in formats that are accessible to all residents. Comments or questions? Okay.
Nope.
So the next set of policies, the first is coordination among emergency response agencies and focusing on evacuation as well. The fourth policy is ensuring that infrastructure in each of the different floodplains conforms to existing elevation standards. And the fifth policy is to site critical and lifeline facilities outside of hazard zones. And all types of hazard zones in the safety element. Questions, comments?
Nope.
Okay, next slide. Policy 6 is for seismic hazards, require unreinforced masonry buildings to undergo evaluation and potentially get retrofitted. Policy 7 is to ensure adequate firefighting infrastructure related to water, roadways, clearances for vehicles, and also legible street signs. And policy 8 is to minimize loss of life and property from fire events through community outreach. Questions, comments?
Nope.
Okay, next set is to prohibit new hazardous waste storage facilities in areas identified at risk of sea level rise or flooding. Policy 10, reviewing development applications on lands that contain natural gas wells or other hazardous facilities and requiring maintenance plans for those. And the 11th policy is related to extreme heat, so incorporating shade structures, green spaces, drinking water facilities, and heat resilient building techniques into both public and private projects.
No questions.
Next slide. Okay, so now we're on to programs, so implementing those goals and policies that I just mentioned. The first is to collaborate with service providers in the county to update the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan to meet FEMA requirements. The second is to essentially prohibit the development of gas wells within 3,200 feet of sensitive receptors, which would be in compliance with Senate Bill 1137. The third is to prepare and update the emergency operations plan every 5 years to ensure adequate response and recovery.
Jackie, I have a question on number 2.
Yes.
The 3,200 feet from the gas well, is that for decommissioned and inactive gas wells as well, or is it just an active gas well?
I believe that is for new gas wells, so
Okay.
it wouldn't be for existing.
Is there anything around the decommissioned or inactive gas wells? As far as feet for, building interference?
I would have to look that up. I'm not totally sure about that one.
Okay,
And
go ahead.
yeah, with regards to that, the 3,200 feet, that would pretty much, I believe the Esperson property has a lot of gas well on that.
Mhm.
So that would pretty much take away any probability or possibility of development on it, would it not?
So this
Just a little bit of clarification. So this is a prohibition of licensing new wells. But it's not a prohibition against homes being located within that distance, I don't believe. So what this is restricting is the opening of new wells. And as far as any restrictions about the closing and decommissioning of wells, we are starting to see that direction in new state laws, but nothing that is going to yet obligate the closure of wells within the city.
So if you could get back to us on the decommission and inactive wells and how far or how close we can build to that, that would be great. Anybody else with questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In Trilogy, there are several sites that are designated as potential well sites. And there were not homes built, they're kind of built as green space, and there's signs there saying potential wells. How does that affect those potential wells? Does this Senate bills then prohibit any future development of those wells?
Yes, so any potential well sites that would be in 3,200 feet of a residence, school, or medical facility would essentially be prohibited. So they can remain designated as that, but they would not be able to move forward with their permitting process.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody, public comment? Anybody online?
There's no public comment online.
Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you.
Okay, so program.
I'm sorry, I don't even know if it fits under this, but we're talking about safety and policies around catastrophes that can happen. Does medical fit into this at all? Medical facilities, medical emergency response, et cetera?
So yes, that would fall under the safety element. There were several policies in the previous safety element that were around ensuring adequate medical response in facilities in Rio Vista.
So can we put it back in, or was it intentionally taken out?
I believe we'll still see some programs related to that in the next slides.
Okay.
Okay. So program 4 is also related to flooding. So it's just pursuing funding to retrofit existing city infrastructure in the different sets of floodplains, and coordinating with the other regional agencies responsible for flood and stormwater infrastructure for that. Program 5 is to evaluate, again, related to flooding, evaluating storm drain culverts and bridges in the floodplains to ensure that they can accommodate a 200-year flood.
Okay, good.
Program 6, again, is funding to improve and retrofit the marina, pier, and boat launch to withstand king tide and sea level rise events. And the 7th program is to assess critical and lifeline facilities to ensure that they are adequately built for seismic safety and earthquake performance standards to ensure they remain operational.
Can I ask a question about the pier?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm sorry. I was thinking the fishing dock. Yeah, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Okay.
Next.
Yes, please. And program 8 is focused on fire prevention programs. So this would be presenting at an annual fire prevention week at schools, assisting businesses in preparing fire prevention programs, fire extinguisher demonstrations, fire inspections, and inspections for business license approvals as well.
We're good.
Program 9 is also grant funding to ensure that all public facilities are resilient to climate change hazards. Critical and lifeline facilities would include essential infrastructure like the water and wastewater systems, emergency and medical services, cooling centers, heating centers, and that includes backup power supplies as well.
Okay.
Program 10 is focused on resilient centers and establishing those at existing sites around Rio Vista that offer refuge from extreme heat or other hazard events and can stay online when the power goes out.
Okay.
Program 11 is to provide the community with information on the health effects of extreme heat and severe weather to ensure minimization of health effects weatherization of homes, and preventing damage to property. Program 12 is related to extreme heat, so installing shade structures, trees, public drinking water facilities at some of the public and visitor centers in Rio Vista. And program 13 is conducting community emergency response team trainings or CERT trainings to provide community members with the ability to respond to disasters.
Any questions?
And does that include medical under that SC 13?
So it may include
CPR, et cetera.
the fire department will likely have more specifics about the training type. It typically does. The CERT trainings are so that if emergency personnel can't get to a situation, that people in the community are able to respond. So there would likely be some sort of light medical training.
And as part of these programs, do they have, I don't know, they're packages that people could pick up for instances where there is an emergency and there is no emergency response? I mean, I don't know if you get that granular in this or not. If you don't, then just ignore the comment.
It wouldn't be part of the specific trainings. It would have to be another program provided by the police or fire department.
So do people have thoughts around that? I mean, I think that in a rural town like ours, there's going to be times where people are cut off. For instance, in flooding situations, people will be cut off from the rest of the community and people won't have access to them as well. So it would seem like that would be a decent program to have.
And that would also be, so a program on a previous slide was related to resilience hubs, resilience centers, and those resilience centers could be a source for those supplies during emergencies.
Okay.
Councilmember Okamura, could you share a little bit more about what types of materials you would anticipate or would be interested in being distributed?
I'm not an emergency response person, so I would have no idea, but heating blankets, basic medical facility materials, et cetera. I don't know what they would be.
I wasn't sure if you were thinking sandbags or, what all, so.
That'd be kind of heavy.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So we'll move on.
Wait.
Wait.
I have a comment on that. Back on the handout was provided to us. Program number 3 says prepare an update for the emergency operations plan every 5 years and ensure city departments. And that would be kind of, I think the emergency plan should be something that the city has and is kept up to date. And that's where I think to address Councilmember Okamura's questions, that's the type of area that would go into an emergency plan, so that when an emergency strikes, fire, police, and city staff know what their responsibilities are and have identified volunteers that are part of a CERT program to be activated.
Sure.
And I would add that in a community such as ours, if there were going to be then public AEDs posted somewhere.
Right.
This place, I would imagine maybe the clubhouse is out at Trilogy, the library.
Yeah, and they do.
Have that.
Yeah, but this is actually a perfect agenda item. I see that Richland's in the audience for the Public Safety Commission to deal with too. Come up with ideas, I would think.
I think we can do that.
Yeah. Oh, you're on it.
I'm on it.
Oh, there you go.
Anybody else?
I am sorry to backtrack a little bit here, but there was a policy that you talked about earlier that wasn't in the original handout that we got that had to do with looking at unreinforced masonry structures around town. Could we possibly just go back to that for a minute? I'm just trying to figure out about that policy and kind of find out how that would be handled.
I'd like to speak to that. policy, while presented in this presentation, I have discussed it with the Public Works Director, and we believe that the inspection of buildings would not be something we proactively go out and reinforce unreinforced structures. It would be a matter of, in the event that they're determined unsafe, or if there's building permits or some other event would trigger that look at unreinforced buildings. But the program, I have to get back to it.
6.
Here it is.
Yeah.
We did not feel it would be appropriate to go out and require existing unreinforced buildings to be seismically retrofitted. So this actually is a policy that we had anticipated would not be presented to the working group.
And if this property was sold, would that trigger this at all? Meaning a new building owner would then be held to this?
Well, first of all, the statement is that we don't expect this policy SE6 to be retained. As far as the requirements for upgrading an unreinforced building at sale, I'm not aware that that would be triggered. That would be a question that I'd have to discuss with our building official and find out when those requirements would be applied. Certainly, if any building is identified as a hazard, that's a time when we would go in and take a look and require retrofitting before it could be occupied. If there are modifications to a building, we might look at it and require seismic retrofitting at that time. But I really would need to consult with the building folks to understand how those requirements would be applied.
And just looking at it in terms of if it just applies to commercial buildings, if it applies to residential, just, kind of what some parameters are around there. Because I think there's a few pretty significant residential structures in town that are unreinforced masonry.
Yes, and the cost of that seismic retrofitting can be quite significant and can, in fact, affect the historic integrity of the building. Would the working group like a report back on this particular issue?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm adding it to the list. I believe Jacqueline, thank you for walking us through that. SE13 was the last policy that we wanted to share with the group. And so I think we're at a point now of asking if we've captured the issues that the general plan working group would like to have considered under the safety element, and a little bit more of an open discussion about the scope of this element and any items that the group might wish to see added.
Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, I'll open it up to public comment.
Hey guys, ladies, looking at what you guys have, I don't know if you're going to go over it later on. My big concern is the elephant room that we're in. If we have an event, I'm really concerned about this particular building being in a flood zone. And I don't know if the general plan has an idea to move City Hall closer to maybe the police department in the business park or something like that. But I'd like to know what are the plans for City Hall coming up, because I think I think we keep records here, and it's one of those essential buildings in my opinion. So I'd like to know what we're doing with City Hall, because I think it's susceptible to flooding way before a 100-year flood comes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online?
There are no public comments online.
Okay. You're clear to go, Paul.
Chair, any additional comments from the working group?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, thank you for the input. We're going to be again taking a look through these goals, policies, and programs. You will probably see a little bit of refinement when we come back to you at the next meeting. You'll also see the the full element that supports it. We are going to provide you with a document that Jacqueline's team prepared. It's the technical studies that they completed. And so you'll have that available to review. It is a significant amount of work that her team did. I really want to commend them on the thoroughness of it. We are attempting to keep all elements brief and easily consumed. So we're going to have that technical document as appendices to the general plan, but not try to provide all of the information within the element itself. So with that, I think we've concluded our review of the goals, policies, and program. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Informational items. 5.1, California Forever Flannery
Chair,
Associates.
Chair, I do have one additional item that I would like to go over with you. I mentioned at the outset of the discussion, and this could be considered as an informational item. I'm not sure that you're going to be interested in providing direction this evening, but I did want to get a discussion started. And this item is related to a property owner, Jared Graham, who owns 1015 Airport Road, Parcel C. So if you're, I'll just skip to the slide. So this is 1015 Parcel C. Merino trenching is right here. And then the city-owned property is up here, just to get oriented. Mr. Graham thinks that there would be benefits on this site to allow higher density than is currently planned. Right now, we have designated his site neighborhood residential. This was based on a request that he had made probably 9-10 months ago. And so the working group had applied the neighborhood residential designation of this property. That designation allows up to 7.5 dwellings per unit. Mr. Graham believes it would be possible to have a very positive project that would involve higher density, possibly including some amount of multifamily. He's provided the following justification. He believes that greater diversity of housing, and this might be single family or some type of attached housing, would meet the broader needs of the community. So there would be some folks who economically are not able to enter into the single family housing market. So higher density would be an option. He believes that the location could support more development or higher density development based on the infrastructure that it's available. And this would be a more efficient use of that infrastructure capacity. And then he feels that a well-designed higher density project could create a more walkable environment and a greater sense of community. So higher density oftentimes provides communal space. And so these are the reasons that Mr. Graham feels like this is a proposal worth considering. Again, the property is directly adjacent to Homecoming and proximate to the city property. I will point out we still identify this in-holding as industrial, but as of last night, the city did consummate a land swap. The 5 acres here designated in gray is now owned by the city and will be incorporated into the overall residential development plan for the city's property. So this gray will also be eliminated from the general plan land use map and converted to a designation consistent with the city property. Mr. Graham's asking that this would be a higher density designation. And I explained to you the general rationale for that. And here we see in an aerial, we can get a sense a little better of what's going on. Poppy House Road in the business park approaches the site, but does not continue through. The city does have right-of-way around the property. And Harris Road currently ends at the entry to Homecoming, but we do have right-of-way for extending Harris down and then out to Airport Road past Merino trenching. And so there will be road access to this property. The city's 62.5 acre property, commonly for years referred to as the 50 acre property. It's actually 62.5 acres, and includes a strip of land adjacent to Homecoming. All of this is being planned for a variety of uses, including low, medium, and higher density residential, as well as a set aside for some type of public, municipal, or commercial industrial use. So this is going to be a mixed use project here. We are not sure that a road is really feasible in this corridor. It's relatively tight, but at a minimum, at the staff level, we're recommending that this corridor be a bicycle pedestrian corridor, if not a vehicular corridor. But that would allow this project to interface with that, would have access to pedestrian bicycle circulation. Probably the project's entry would come off of Harris, and very likely there would need to be some secondary exit point, but that's really a little bit down the road to figure out. The question to you is, the working group has already concluded that it would be reasonable to have this property developed as single family residential, low density residential. Are you interested in considering increasing the allowed density on this property to something that would allow higher density single family or lower density multifamily products like townhouses, condos, or something along those lines? Chair, that's what I have for you this evening. I don't believe we have a representative from the property in the meeting, although I would ask that we do check and make sure there's no representative available to speak.
Not here at City Hall. Anybody online?
As far as I know, there's no one online.
Okay. So Chair, that's my comments.
All right. The property that the 62.5 acres that the city owns that we talked about on Tuesday night, Jerry Nolan had a question about the flight path over that property. Have you been able to research that yet?
Well, the property is not subject to any airport land use plan restrictions. So there are airport operations in the area, yes. I believe that the maximum height for this property would be improvements would be allowed up to 100 feet, or anything higher than that would require approval from the Airport Land Use Commission. Nothing that's anticipated for this property will approach 100 feet. So there's no land use restriction per se. I think that Mr. Nolan pointed out that it's part of the approach, and the planes would be flying over at an elevation as low as 500 feet. And that will, I guess, be an effect on the properties and possibly as far as noise, but this land is outside of the 55 decibel boundaries. So it's what we consider to be appropriate for this type of development. So from a regulatory perspective, residential here is appropriate.
Mr. Nolan's online. Do you have any more to say about that? Can you unmute?
Am I here?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much. I find that hard to believe. The standard traffic pattern at the Rio Vista Airport brings it's a downwind approach, a base turn to final turn to runway 33 will put you 500 feet or below, right dead center in the middle of this property. I cannot believe that that's allowed. I don't know the FAA rules on housing near airports. Airports are magnets for housing developments. I cannot believe, just go out there tomorrow, tonight. I'm looking at that area from my house right now. Planes are below 500 feet, right over the middle of that property. I cannot believe that is allowed. I hope we can research.
Yeah, I'll bring up the airport land use compatibility plan in just a second, and I'll show you where what we're looking at. Um, so this is.
Why are you doing that? Is this a 6 o'clock meeting or a 5 o'clock meeting?
It's 5 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm
I-
going to stop sharing that screen and bring up the airport land use compatibility plan. Okay, you should see the diagram with the airport.
Yes.
I'm very
Okay,
familiar.
so the runway that Mr. Nolan's referring to is this, I don't know, I guess there it is. It's runway.
That's 3-3,
33.
the runway to the north,
Great.
heading of 330, runway 3-3.
Okay, and the designations that we see range in severity of restrictions from land use compatibility 1 through 5, and then the final designation is traffic pattern zone. So a portion of this property, the kind of northern extent of it, is within what's referred to as the traffic pattern zone, but there are no land use restrictions, even within, I believe, well, I can go to the next part of this, which is the traffic pattern zone land uses, but I don't believe that there's any restrictions on the on housing within that area. The other thing that we would look at is the noise contours. Let me stop sharing while I scroll through this and get to the noise, because that's the other thing we often worry about is, you know, how loud is it going to be? So the northern portion of the property, similar to what we had just seen, is within the 55 CNEL. That's a noise designation, 55 CNEL zone, just on the northern part there. Residential is considered generally acceptable within the 55 CNEL area. We're looking for noise levels in homes in yards to be less than 60 decibels. So this is a little bit, you know, on the edge, candidly, as far as noise. So we'll be looking at that as far as what uses go in the northern portion, but so far we've been looking at detention basins and potentially non-residential in the northernmost extent of the property. The balance of the property is outside of those sense. Oh, did I get that right? I apologize. I'm completely off.
No, yeah, you are.
We're way down here.
Right.
Yeah, we're way outside of the 55 CNEL. So
No, something's wrong. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've been at the airport for 18 years. I've seen many of these maps and diagrams. That diagram is not what I'm trying to project. I can tell you now Liberty Island, as the city staff knows, is called daily over airport noise, airplanes not flying to standard procedures and so forth. This is, in my opinion, 100 times worse, because the landing phase of an aircraft making turns to the base leg and the final approach, just go out there tomorrow and watch the airplanes approach that northern runway. 3-3 is the heading. And you'll see how low they are. I'll fly over your houses tonight. You'll find out how low 500 feet or below is. It is right dead center in the middle of that housing projected area. If it's allowed.
Mr. Nolan's far more knowledgeable than any of our staff members on airports. So I think that we have an item that we'll want to consider within the review of the land use plans that will occur at the next council meeting 2 weeks from on the 17th of October.
And the Airport Land Use Commission meeting is meeting, I think, on the 12th. And this would be a great time, I would think, before the great work you guys are doing and gals, to, hey, we're looking at this development. Can we get this on your agenda? Because they don't meet a whole lot of times, but it would be great to ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Paul, anything else?
Sure, I think we've heard some good comments, interesting comments from Jerry that we'll have to follow up on regarding the city property. But the question tonight is whether higher density at this project directly adjacent to Homecoming is something that the working group feels like they would support, feels like they would like to consider, feels like it's not a good idea. Do you need more information or more time? How should we proceed with this particular request? We do not have to reach any answer this evening if you're not ready, but if you have clear feelings and strong feelings, we can conclude this discussion tonight.
Anybody?
Yeah,
That's a good
Sure.
question.
Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I was gonna ask, it sounds like what he's trying to do is make it comparable to our 62.5 acres, essentially. I mean, we're gonna be doing some high density out there. And this will kind of pair it up to where it'll blend in. And if so, if that's what he's doing, is he anticipating he's going to maybe try to share developers and kind of branch off of what we're doing there too? Or is this completely unrelated and not anything to do with what we're doing?
There is some relationship. If we were not considering the residential on the city property, this would probably make a lot less sense. This property owner has been speaking with a developer, and it's really the developer who thinks that there might be some value here for higher density, not high density, but this would be in that medium density kind of missing middle range that we discussed. And I believe that the developer, whenever if the city does in fact release an RFP for development of the city property, they're probably going to be interested in that area as well. So not completely unrelated, but this is a standalone decision.
Yeah, so I have a couple comments. One, everyone knows this about me already. The preservation of green space. And so that area on your diagrams, you had one diagram that showed the property buttressing up right to the back of the Homecoming development. And then the next, it showed a gap, which is an easement, it looks like, across there. And then I guess the question is, and I think you mentioned that there's a potential of a road going back there. So accessibility is one thing that I'm concerned about, because at some point we're going to need, without getting onto Airport Road, accessibility without driving through Homecoming every time we want to get downtown. So I always thought that there would be a road ultimately connecting into the business park. And then, so that's one comment. And then the second one is just, we need to have some green space. I don't want to just butted back to back with the Homecoming development. I think that's poor design.
I think it kind of makes sense with what's being considered for the city's 50 acre or however many acre properties. With its adjacency to Homecoming, I would go for something that would be maybe medium density at the most, since it could be kind of a natural transition from all those single homes toward this more dense site. You know, I would prefer that as opposed to having something higher in density at that particular property, just considering its adjacency to all that established single family.
Under their current designation, he can't do medium density. Is that what we're saying to him, right? So it didn't even change. Sure.
Yeah, my concern is that I think we need a little bit more multifamily, medium density housing. We need something for younger people that are coming in, starting a family that can't afford to buy a home in this town. You know, if you're not retiring or you're not making a lot of money, you can't afford to buy in here. And we need those young people coming in and bringing their vitality to this town. So I'm supportive of something that is more accessible to the younger people.
So I concur with that. So a question with regards to what I was talking about, accessibility, and at what point can you approach an owner and get an easement across a property to Like if we want to put a road that connected directly into the business park.
We,
That's just a later discussion, I assume, but I have to ask it.
oh geez, I was sitting here looking at this beautiful map thinking, well, the answer's right there and you're not seeing it. So we do already own this right of way.
Okay.
There
Right.
is some concerns about whether the geometry of getting a road in there. But I think that if this goes forward as a residential project, it might simply be a matter of if we need a little more ground to make this a safe turn, then that would be required at that time. We would want to study at the staff level how feasible this road is. As mentioned at the council meeting, at a minimum, we expect this to be a bicycle pedestrian corridor. It may also be a vehicular corridor, which would give you that option then of approaching the property from Airport, approaching it from Harris, or approaching it from Poppy House. So that would increase your vehicular access options.
And any new roads require bike path, right?
Not explicitly, but when we would be looking at this area, it would be very important to have a dedicated bike pedestrian improvement. So, because, this is now becoming the corridor to get from Trilogy to downtown.
Right.
One way or another, there's bigger connections to be made, but this is becoming a very important linkage in the bike ped circulation.
Yes.
So if that area isn't wide enough for traffic going both ways, could it be made one way and have it go one way from Harris Road to the business park and still be able to keep the bike path in there?
Certainly, there's lots of options, and that will get into the specific design of the site. Apologies. We do have a fixed boundary, which is Homecoming. We're not going to in any way change that boundary. So really our area to make accommodations would be on the 1015C property. And whether that's a one-way street connection, whether we need a little bit of extra ground to allow dedicated pedestrian bike circulation. There's other options. Maybe we only have a generous pedestrian bike sidewalk on one side of the street. That way we can make it wider and we simply don't put sidewalk on the other. There's lots of ways to play with this from a design perspective. But,
Right. I was also thinking that you would be able to, because I suspect there's going to be a lot of public comment when you suggest a road right in the back of these people's homes. And that's why I was thinking, is this the time that you talk about an easement across the 1015 property? So Harris goes directly into the business park. And then you bypass having to put a road right next to people's homes that they've never had before.
under that scenario, I think you're suggesting a Harris Road that goes like
Right.
this
Correct.
or like this.
Or straight across. I mean, you have to get an easement across that other lot, but we own it right now. Yeah. The one that is north of, in the dirt patch below the 1015 airport, we've sold off a couple of those lots, but the rest of the land north of that is free.
Big portion of that we can't develop either. I think there's a buffer there for, well, no, that's on the.
No,
Homecoming
that's
side.
It was
sellable
the
property over
cannabis
there.
buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, there's restrictions on the proximity of cannabis,
right.
but this could be other non-cannabis uses.
What is the, to the right of the red square? What is that? What's
That is
part?
Merino
That's
Trenching.
Merino
So,
Trenching
Merino
Company.
trenching.
yeah, and they've done a fair amount of improvements on this site. I think they're there for, certainly for the foreseeable future. So as we think of this, we should anticipate that Merino Trenching will be a future use within this whole fabric of landscape.
Do they own, what about north of their property toward airport? Is that still city property or is that owned by somebody? Do we know?
This is privately owned and we've actually had some residential inquiries on it as well.
Okay.
So. And then there is a detention basin here that
Right.
may be instrumental in serving both the city property, some of the city property, as well as this parcel.
Any
Um,
other questions?
So far in my just kind of rough tally, I've heard, I think 4 members say that some higher density in this could be a positive thing. I haven't really heard anybody expressing opposition. Is there more discussion of this needed? Would you like staff to bring this back? Is there additional information, or would you be comfortable with just coloring this in as something akin to medium density residential?
Yeah, I think seem to be okay with that.
Okay,
I'd
then
like to know a little bit more about what high density, the pros and cons of some high density there.
we are anticipating some high density within the city property. And high density can be developed at up to 25 or 30 dwellings per acre. So that really, high density is apartments, apartment building kind of development. And at that point, you really get into being able to address households with very limited income. So a lot of the medium density is more what's now referred to in planning circles as the missing middle. It's the the young firefighter, the young teacher getting started in their career, but they can't get into buying a single family home. So it's products like condos, townhouses, smaller format single family, things like that. They're not traditional single family.
And what did you say the acreage is of 1015?
This is 5 acres.
5.
Under medium density, how many units could be put in
I
roughly?
generally expect around 15 units the acre, so you could see 75 homes. As we start to look at circulation and if land is needed, that could cut into that. So, it's not a particularly big property, so we might see more along the lines of 50 homes. And that would be getting into some type of attached housing, townhouses, where you see blocks of 4, 5, 6 units in a continuous block, and then a number of those buildings.
And then at what point, just for future knowledge, if we enter into a business development agreement with them, I mean, we change the designation and we get into a business development agreement, at that point, is that when we say, hey, we'd like to have an easement across your property, potentially? Or cut in, even if we go on the south side of their property where the city owns property, and we were to want that a wider space so we could have bike paths, et cetera. Is that the point that we have that discussion?
Typically, you would have that discussion in the project review. Where a tentative map is required, where you're creating a lot of little parcels, that's a very natural discussion. It's a bit harder of a discussion for multifamily because they may not need a tentative map. They may say we're developing this as a single parcel. So I think we need to consider and probably have some staff discussion with our engineering folks about exactly how we would acquire the additional right of way and when we would be able to require it. The project would still go.
I just don't want to lose all our leverage.
I
We
understand.
change it and then we have no more leverage because it's a done deal.
So what I'm hearing is general openness at this point. Let us explore a little bit how we would be able to ensure the circulation needs are met. And before we make any final decision, for now, we're going to put a placeholder of a medium density type of development on this property. I will say, just as an aside, I've looked at the designations. We have neighborhood residential and we have multifamily. I think we may need a designation in between that is something akin to, either we have an additional designation or we retain the right to designate this as a medium density in zoning. What I'm trying to say is I don't think we necessarily want to entertain apartment buildings at this location because of the amount of traffic and the proximity to homecoming. So I think medium density could make sense. I would be a little bit concerned with potentially getting, 5 acres could conceivably have 125 units of apartments. I think that could be problematic at this location. So what I have heard so far is an openness to consider something higher density than single family. I'd like to explore that a little bit and talk with other staff members and then report back to the working group before we make any final decision about this property.
We talked about that extension going around the parcel C. What if we just took Harris Road right straight through that property onto Norman Richardson Drive? And then that area that we were thinking of doing that one-way or walkway area, what if we just gave that to the property owner and just kind of shifted that around? Would that work better?
That could be a more natural connection. One thing to consider is our pedestrian trail will probably be going off of Sullivan somehow, either right below our properties or cutting right across. This picture is cutting it off, but our pedestrian route to DH White is going to be from Sullivan and down. So we just want to make sure we don't make that too circuitous. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
And the answer to that might simply be, if it's a multifamily project, we may be able to incorporate a generous bike ped route through the project. That works a lot better with multifamily than it does with single family. So, but the idea of a land swap and just changing the road alignment is certainly a possibility.
Anybody else? Okay.
Great. So let's
So we're at information items. Do you have anything else to say about Forever Flannery?
Just, as everybody knows, it's a very fluid situation. What I've heard clearly from the council is we don't want to abut Flannery in any way. So whether we're going to have a buffer directly adjacent to the city or whether we can work with and get Flannery to recognize that these communities should not grow together. I think that's a discussion that will be occurring with the city manager, the mayor, and at some point with the council. So not a whole lot more from my end to report on Flannery.
Okay. Today, apparently, the Department of Water Resources is not going forward with just the smelt fish hatchery that we talked about the other night. So maybe we need to bring this back to us for the Army base and maybe kind of rethink that whole area now that it technically is going to be all of ours.
I think that certainly is something the city needs to do. I don't know whether it can really occur within the scope of the general plan at this time. I think what we're talking about is a major reset on planning for the former Army base. And that's an incredible opportunity for the city, but it's probably, time to really step back and think about what does the city want and how is the city going to accomplish development on that property. So if there's a sense among this group that you'd like to revisit the description of the Army base within the general plan, absolutely. I don't think we'll be able to get through what I would refer to as a real planning effort that leads to any kind of, this is how we want the site developed. I believe that's beyond the scope of our efforts that this group is working on.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody from the public? Kind of any final comments? Yep, come on up, Aiden.
Hi, Aiden Mayhood. I would just like to discuss that earlier in the meeting, this commission talked about maybe moving the LAFCO boundary to the northwest of the city. I think that's a great idea. From my understanding, no landowners within the current LAFCO boundaries southwest of the city want any sort of development in that area, including the areas that are under a conservation easement.
Thank you. Anybody online? Any final comments?
There are no public comments online.
Okay, so if you don't have anything else, Paul, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.